Today, I want to talk about Navi 22, a graphics card that I believed, if handled correctly, could be the most important die launched in the RDNA 2 versus Ampere generation, which, according to some sources actually, shouldn't even be launched at all. I want to talk about that, why it could be a great product, or why maybe AMD just shouldn't even bother. And speaking of not bothering, let's set the stage for the market this card would launch into. If you look around the online landscape right now amongst PC gamers, really amongst any gamers, there's unfortunately a lot of apathy and disillusionment. We've seen an incredibly impressive set of consoles and graphics cards launch from both Nvidia and AMD last fall. Well, everyone sits by and says they don't care because they can't get one. Which, on that note, I do need to cover something specifically before we can move forward. In quarter 3 and quarter 4, I gave out a lot of specific numbers on launches of Ampere, and Zen 3 and RDNA 2 products. And because they were hard to get, there were ceaseless accusations that these numbers couldn't be true. But the fact is, AMD's financials are out. I reported that there would be 1 million plus Zen 3 chips shipped by the end of quarter 1 2021 and possibly closer to the end of quarter 4 of 2020. And well, that's now official. And it's worth mentioning that that information, those numbers, were specific shipments per region that have turned out to be 100% correct. And much of the sources that got me that information are the same ones that told me about Ampere and Big Navi shipping numbers, which of course has also turned out to be correct. AMD shipped more high-end graphics cards in quarter 4 in 2020 than they did in prior flagship launches in the same quarter, and they did ship these to gamers, unlike Nvidia. Now, I'm not saying this to gloat, but I am saying this because this reality needs to be understood before we can, really have a nuanced and proper conversation about what's going on in the gaming hardware market and what it needs. To be honest, I feel like a lot of people near the end of last year claimed they had all of these sources saying the opposite of what I said, and we now know from AMD's financials, it's just not true. It was anecdotal evidence, and there were a lot of tech tubers and writers playing into people's rage instead of trying to have an honest conversation. And I hope it was worth the clicks, guys. I hope it was. But this isn't a conversation to vent. This is actually important, I think, because this channel is about nuanced and about having adult and real conversations. Look, I believe you. I believe you if you say you've been trying to get a Big Navi graphics card and you haven't been able to. Why would you lie about that? I believe you. But to point the finger at the wrong problem eliminates the right conversation. And well, that's what I want to have today about Navi 22. The fact is, the reason these AMD graphics cards are hard to get is because they are in very, very high demand. And although they continue to ramp up higher numbers, likely getting to over 500,000 shipped by summer, probably by mid-spring this year, they're hard to get. And it just won't work. 500,000 Big Navi cards isn't enough for this market, and so we need to talk about what a real solution could be. And based on new information that surfaced about yield rates for various RDNA 2 cards, I think the right thing to happen is a new die better tailored for meeting the demand of this market, and that's what I want to talk about today. So please stay with me, but first an ad from a sponsor. Skillshare is a sponsor of this video. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for creative and curious people that allows its members to explore new skills, deepen existing passions, and get lost in creativity. It's curated specifically for learning, meaning there are no ads, and they're always launching new premium classes so you can stay focused and follow wherever your creativity takes you. From classes that introduce members to animation to broad subjects like managing daily productivity, Skillshare has what you need to make this year a year that you grow. And there always are more ways to grow than you might expect. For example, I think maybe I could learn to grow better at taking pictures of everyday objects for the YouTube channel with Tabitha Park. And if you also want to grow, you should not hesitate to use Skillshare because it is very affordable. It's less than $10 a month for an annual subscription. And the first 1,000 people to use the link on screen and in my description will get a free trial of Skillshare Premium membership. Sign up for Skillshare today, a wonderful resource for learning. All right, you are good. You get your treat now. Okay. Navi 22, the little brother to the almost impossible to get for most people big Navi so far. To be entirely honest, conversations with sources connected to AMD recently indicated, well, as recently as I'd say about 3 weeks ago, that AMD was wondering if they should even bother to launch Navi 22. And that is information because the truth of the matter is, as far as I've been reporting at the very least, Navi 22's development was only about a month behind Navi 21's. There was real suggestion from some sources that if they wanted to, they could do a paper launch as early as the end of December, and Q1 was always the target of Navi 22. I mean, it was on the early professional roadmaps, as I've reported. But when AMD saw Navi 21 selling for the price of the 3080, and they still couldn't keep it in stock, I mean, there was a real reason to wonder why you should even bother launching anything else. I mean, finally, AMD has managed to have this mindshare, which again, if you make the argument AMD isn't making, trying to make enough graphics cards, which they are making more than they were during the Vega generation, comparing launch to launch, then you're missing a bigger thing to point out here. AMD's mindshare is definitely here. Right, this demand is completely unprecedented for a flagship AMD GPU since about a decade ago. People are choosing to wait and are trying to get as hard as they can the top AMD card in as big of numbers as NVIDIA, as far as the numbers suggest right now. And that's why AIBs are marking them up to about $1,000, which, let me make this very clear too. Speaking with some AIBs, their excuses for why the price of their AIB cards were hundreds of dollars more than the reference model are not very convincing. It's pretty much greed, guys. And so, yeah, if you're AMD and you're looking at your cards sell for almost any price you put them out, why even? There's no doubt they were always going to bring Navi 22 to laptop. They have to have some answer to NVIDIA's Ampere mobile lineup. So that was always going to happen. But why launch them on desktop? Especially when the 3060 Ti looked to be, well, about as good as whatever Navi 22 is going to be anyways, and be $400 and launching before it. How do you compete with that? But since these conversations have been happening at AMD about a month ago, a lot has changed. First of all, the RTX 3060 is definitely cheaper than I think most people expected at $330 with 12 gigabytes. That's cheaper than what the 2060 was a few years ago. And yeah, that's what competition gets you. But after further evaluation, it honestly also seems a bit weaker, at least to me. If we look at NVIDIA's own numbers here, what I'm seeing is a card that might just be 20% better than the 2060 based on their own numbers, and I'm guessing at most will be 30% better on average, at most. That makes it a 2070 Super at best, and there's a decent chance after third-party reviews, the 3060 Desktop Edition will just end up being something that trades, blows, or loses to a 5700 XT in the latest games. I'm not saying that will happen, but that's where it is, somewhere between like a 5700 to a 2070 Super. That's not that powerful. And with that understanding, you see why they made it cheaper than the 2060 and why they were forced to give it more RAM than they wanted to, than most of their lineup right now, and why AMD doesn't have to worry about tighter margins on a card that directly competes with this, right? And that brings us to point number 2. The 3060 Ti was something I was told AMD was worried about getting close to $400 at retail. But if we look around right now, that's just not happening, is it, people? That thing's selling for over $500. So I have no doubt that AMD can make decent margins on this thing at $400 or more. Based on the bombs I saw and my own independent math, I came to the conclusion that AMD can make a good old, 45% markup if they sell the 6700 XT at 350. So there's really no reason to not launch it unless they're worried the 3060 Ti will get below 400. But now we know they could probably sell it for 400 or more and get close to the same margins as Navi 21. So now the margins discussion is gone. And finally, this brings us to point number 3 on what has changed in the past month for why maybe you might want to launch a Navi 22 to desktop. And that's this revelation of what the current yields are on Navi 21. Now, I want to be clear from my best sources, the ones that got me all of this information about the RDNA 2 lineup, 5 months ago now, I think it is. They suggested to me recently that Big Navi's yields are actually better than expected, especially for the 6900 XT, which, according to this source, whose information lined up with my RDNA 2 information for the majority of last year, so while I can't double down on him, I have to say his track record so far looks pretty convincing. He suggests yields for Navi 21 are around 50%, and I want to be clear about what this means. This is a very big die, and 50% yields on Big Navi does not mean they're only getting 50% of the wafer, right, of cards out of it. That's 50% without needing to disable anything. Although I have no doubt they are disabling some of those cards to make 6800s, the ones that have a couple of dual compute units that won't clock as high, right? They'll say, maybe we have a full ADCU die, all compute units work, but these two don't clock very well. Let's disable those two, or those 8 compute units, and that can be a 6800 XT, right? I've been told that the 6900 XT's yields are pretty great, and 50% on a die that big, even if they disable some to the 6800 XT. Yeah, that's, out of a wafer, being able to sell a third of those as $1,000 graphics cards, let's say, that's incredible. But that also tells us why they would be disabling so many of these to 60 compute units, because that was something that always confused me. It's like, why is the 6800 disabled so much? Well, half of the yields do have defective dies, and so while they probably have a very high rate of excellent yields, they probably, because it's a big die, also have a decent amount that need to be disabled a ton. And if I had to guess then, there's probably about 20% of those they can't even sell. And that's a problem when you cannot meet demand. When I look around online right now, I see people saying things crazy, like I couldn't get a 3080 or a 6800 XT, so I just bought a 3090, or I couldn't get a 3080, so I bought a 3060 Ti. I think people want anything they can get that's from Ampere or RDNA 2 right now for the newest features, for the newest levels of efficiency. Well, for some of the cards, the 3080 really isn't any more efficient than a 2080 Ti, actually. But people want the greatest and best of, well, not the greatest and best, just basically anything from the newest generations. So let's add up what's been developing over the past month, right? Maybe AMD can make a ton of the best dies for Navi 21 relative to previous gens, what you could get out of the golden sample yields. But also, they do need to disable a lot of those or not be able to sell them at all right now, and they can't meet demand. At the same time, you have a 3060 that's weaker than expected, and a 3060 Ti that's really selling for what the 3070's MSRP was. You have demand problems. You have a huge pricing gap between the $350 and the $500 area. AMD, I know you watch some of my videos. This has been proven by multiple people at Radeon on Twitter before. If you're listening now, please launch Navi 22 as soon as you can. To be honest, from what I'm told, they haven't made a final decision on a launch day yet, so I think there's no chance it's coming out February, and we'll be lucky if we get it March. But if you can, there's such a hole in this market right now that as long as you deliver the performance, it's worth it to have something weaker than a 6800 that you can make 2 of. Because Navi 22's die is probably a little over half as big as Navi 21. And if you overclock the snot out of it, and from what I'm hearing, Navi 22's yields are excellent, so you should be able to, I think you could sell something that just really takes this market by storm. And so, yeah, I guess that's where I am. This is my quick take on Navi 22 and what I believe AMD should do. The fact of the matter is we need something to fill this $400 to $500 area, and it needs to be almost anything that can be produced at a higher rate than GA102 or Navi 21, because you clearly just can't make enough of them for what the demand is right now. And that's true for everyone. Everything is in high demand, whether it's the Xbox or the PlayStation 5. So something needs to be done. Oh, and for the love of God, AMD, next gen or as soon as possible, can you please make something at Global Foundries, even if it's crazy less efficient? Something that's RDNA or better on Global Foundries so that you can disperse some of the capacity away from TSMC, because this is just getting out of hand. And with that, well, I guess I'm starting to ramble. It's time to wrap up this video. Remember, if you like this video, please remember to like it. Please remember to share it. You know, I've got to say, it seems like YouTube's suggesting these videos less often this month. So we really could use your help right now getting the word out if you enjoyed this video. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell button so you don't miss future videos. And if you have the extra money, but only if you do, remember that exclusive podcasts and content come out every week for patrons on the Moore's Law is Dead Patreon with 0 ads. One's coming out tomorrow about what we want out of next-gen shooters. The patrons vote on the subjects themselves, so there's a great community there at the Discord waiting for you if you have the cash. And as always, thank you for watching.